My name is Julianne Swartz, and the piece I made for the library here is called Transfer Object. So what they are, they're objects made of basswood. They're made out of a wood, but it's a wood that can be sanded, and it's kind of a soft wood, so it can be sanded. And we sanded and sanded it a lot to take, well, first of all, to give it a really soft texture, so it could be held easily, and also made, slight indentations in the shape to fit in the hands. And they are the scale and size of books, and but instead of being something you can open, it's got a hole in it that you can listen to. And when you take it off the shelf, it starts to sound a text. Sound starts to come out of this hole, and you can listen to it like that. And each one of them is a particular text. And I read the texts and then chose one paragraph to reproduce. And that paragraph I transcribed and read at the same time, and tried to keep the speed of my hand and the speed of my voice at the same pace. Well, I wanted these to be particularly tactile, like something that you want to hold, something that keeps your hands interested, like they have kind of slight indentations in different places, and they're very, very smooth. And I wanted that because I wanted a relationship between the tactile and listening, to like almost a synesthesia between sound and touch, and also to kind of call attention to the physicality of a book, that when you hold a book or when you read a book, you're holding this thing, and it's almost talismanic. It's like it's something that has weight in your hands, and just kind of to call attention to that experience of reading, the book-related experience of reading, which now is not, so much reading actually doesn't happen physically. It happens with ebooks or with audiobooks, or so just kind of to call attention to that kind of physical talismanic object. Well, I went through lots of different potential texts, and I settled upon, for the 3 books, I mean, this could be a bigger grouping, but for the 3 books I settled on, this one is Pauline Oliveira's, and it's an exercise in, it's reading one of her deep listening exercises. So it's a series of questions that talk about listening as a practice, and kind of challenge a state of listening. And I thought listening was relevant to the act of reading, because when you listen and when you read, you're in a receptive state, and you sort of have to open yourself to something coming in. And then the other 2, this one is a text by Charles Olson, and he is a poet and has written poems, but also has written a lot of texts on poetics and sort of how a poem works. And that particular text is sort of how a poem gets to the reader, sort of what is the velocity, what is the energy of a poem that gets from writer to page to reader. And so that one talks about kind of the energy of a poem. And then this is Bachelard, who is a philosopher, and talks about, it's from the Poetics of Space, and he talks about the resonance. He uses resonance and reverberation as poetic terms, and how something that a writer or artist, or I mean, I take it in all the fields of art, but how and why something resonates and what it touches in a viewer. So this is the Bachelard text. You might hear it through this mic on me because it's coming out of this hole. Sometimes you hear voice, and sometimes you hear the writing, because I recorded them simultaneously, but on 2 different tracks. So I had 2 mics, one a contact mic getting the writing, and the other a voice mic getting my voice. So I played back and forth between those 2. I was writing with a pen on, I kind of set up a pad, almost like a cardboard surface, and put a contact mic under it, and then cemented it in there, and then wrote on that. Well, I wanted it to be distinct from an audiobook, because that's an experience that we are not too familiar with, but it's a familiar experience, and I wanted this to be a less familiar experience. So I didn't want it to be narrative in the way that, oh, I'm listening to someone read to me. So that's why first I just tried recording it in a regular voice, but once I listened to that, it didn't make it different enough. So that's why I tried this. It was almost like a performance or an exercise of, like, can I attach my voice to my hand, and thinking about, like, the voice and the hand and the mind as connected, and how the writer gives from the mind through the hand, or well, now through the keyboard, but gives to the reader, like that kind of lineage or that link. So then, that kind of, and also the slowness of, you can't write as quick as you read or comprehend. So it's like, it was also kind of slowing down the information so it could be received in a different way. The location came first because when I was asked, where on campus I wanted to do something, I, played with ideas for different spaces, but I loved the quietness of a library. Like, even I'm talking very softly and it sounds so loud in here. Like, there's a silence that pervades a library space, and it's a space of introspection, and it's a space of singularity, that someone comes to a library to be alone with. The companionship comes from the book or the information or what that person is intaking. So that atmosphere really called to me, and then I thought, okay, what kind of experience can I make there? And I had this idea of these sort of book objects for a while, so it was nice to develop it. First, I thought that they would be kind of interspersed, just one among whatever, there was one there and there was one there, and you just pull it out. And it could work like that, but because they all ended, the texts I chose tended to be about the experience of the poetic. Like, how does the poetic come to you? How is the poetic transmitted? And then, so for that reason, since this wasn't, ideally I'd want them in a poetry section dispersed, but that wasn't feasible for different reasons. So we put them in this library with reference books, art reference books, but I thought I wanted to get poetry books next to it so that you might hear about the velocity of a poem or the energy of a poem, and then be able to pick up another book and read a poem and identify that. It's important that they're multiples. it could have been more than 3. You know, if I'm, you know, maybe in the future there will be more than 3, but it needed to be at least 3 so that you had this singularity of each text, that they, you know, like this is a book and this is a book, and they each have their singularity and their individual sort of thing that they transfer. So I wanted these also to have that kind of individuality and to transfer each something a bit different. This project does fit into my, to other pieces I've made, in that it's a kind of private, singular experience within a public space. That it's like often I do things that conflate the sense of touch and the and hearing, so that there's a kind of action that instigates a sonic event. So they're similar in that way. Maybe the kind of that sort of intimate relationship between object and viewer, that you hold it. I've made other pieces that you hold and listen to. And yeah, but I've never used written text so overtly as in these. Well, they're finicky technology inside there, like inside this kind of mute. I think of this as it's just so neutral and almost mute, except that it's not mute because it speaks. But inside there, they're really complicated. And I worked with my assistant Lauren for a really long time, trying to figure out how to make them kind of sensitive in the way that I wanted them to be sensitive. So to be able to turn on when you pick them up, and like the speaker has to be a certain distance away from the hole to get a spaciousness in the sound, and then just the whole switch mechanism. And then there's some, now electronics are very small, so I can get an amplifier and a wave player inside there, and a battery. Well, I think it has something to do with like getting something through your body, and not just through your eyes, not just through your ears, not just through your brain, but the tactility helps you to understand it in a different way. It's like a different level of understanding. And that kind of relationship with art is unusual, because usually art is something that has a barrier between your body and it. And I mean, sculpture crosses that because it exists in your body space, but rarely are sculptures meant to be like almost held, just picked up and fondled. So that's part of what I wanted to happen. I do try to activate more than one capacity at one time. So, the thinking capacity, the feeling capacity, the tactile capacity, combining those gives it. I think that combining those capacities gives a richer, an experience that we're not so used to having. And in the reason I ended up getting to that, the way I ended up getting to that process of the simultaneous writing and reading, is because I felt when I was writing, I had a different understanding of what I was reading. Like, I was writing, I was hearing my voice through headphones, and I was reading the material, and it was a really different way to experience it. One paragraph felt this long. You know, when I read, it's like one paragraph, next paragraph, next paragraph. But in this process, the one paragraph was just so stretched and so dense. Like I found other things in it. So that, I think, you know, it's just a different, when the brain, those different parts of the brain are activated, you know, because all of the senses come from the brain, but it's like activating multiple parts of the brain at the same time. I want a visitor to touch these, like to really, like to have a, you know, this, you know, very tactile experience. And I want the kind of experience that I'm talking about in the piece, this transference of information or energy or something from the writer to the reader. I think that's very akin to what I'm always looking for in an art experience, like some kind of transference from me to the viewer or through the object, like the object becomes the mechanism for that transfer, the conduit. Yeah, so I want people to, you know, have their own experiences with these objects.